the critiques have evolved this cycle to be kind of, I think, mostly against like the sub-DAO model and having multiple tokens. And, is it confusing to investors? Is it siphoning value off from the HNT token?
What we're doing there is we are employing the very same principles that have been practiced broadly in the crypto space to preclude people from, stealing funds from one's wallet.
And that's very unique to our model and uniquely enabled by crypto, right? And I think I fully expect people to look at that and emulate it over time, just because it, to me, is an absolutely fascinating way of doing kind of decentralized network planning.
The scammers are now targeting, basically sending text messages to T-Mobile employees and saying hey, for $50, put a bounty on hacking someone's specific person's phone number. Just insane.
Thank you guys both for joining. We've been looking forward to this episode for a while now. I think there's a ton of news and kind of bullish events to cover for Helium Mobile. I want to start off by talking about Iggy Azalea and all of her antics on crypto Twitter over the past couple of weeks. So it seems like she launched a meme coin that has just mooned, doing super well. But what's more relevant here is that she apparently has co-founded or is like a partial owner in an MVNO called Unreal Mobile. And she's been tweeting about it. And she said that she's going to enable payments in Mother, which is her meme coin, or Sol, or maybe a few other crypto tokens. So is there some new competition on the block, Amir? What did you think of her announcement? It kind of feels similar to like the Ryan Reynolds and Mint Mobile kind of celebrity spokesperson or sponsorship. But yeah, what do you think of her new MVNO? Do you think there could ever be, additional service providers on Helium in the future? And could they potentially be a celebrity endorsed MVNO?
Yeah, I think it's interesting is the best way I think I would describe it, right? Usually the meme coins are just pure meme, right? There's nothing going on there. Maybe there's been a couple like Bonk and stuff that have like actual some version of tokenomics in there, but yeah, it's as far as I can tell, it's another MVNO. I haven't looked deeply about what's interesting or different about it beyond the spokesperson. Would love for them to use Helium, and I think we'll be chatting about it at some point in the near future. Yeah, and more DePIN stuff, especially on Solana, I think is great, and there's probably some composability opportunity there, perhaps, and we'll see how it all goes. Maybe there's a Solana Pay thing going on at a minimum. I know they just launched something new and interesting this morning, so yeah, we'll see. Interesting to keep an eye on.
Did you guys ever consider doing a celebrity sponsorship for Helium Mobile?
I think every once in a while, right, Boris, we go through like a big list of random, we should talk to this person, but it never goes anywhere.
Yeah, this is a official recruitment call for Nicki Minaj to come join us, since her arch enemy Iggy Azalea is doing an
Are they enemies?
I think that they are like the sort of competing for the same audience, at least in my mind.
I see.
Boris only has room for one woman in his mind. Either Iggy or Nicki.
It's the Tupac and Biggie of Solana, or 2024 or something.
Yeah. The one thing that I find kind of interesting is that it's not clear if there is any utility at all behind this token. So on one hand, it's kind of like, I believe it's like a meme coin, but on the other hand, it is tied to an MVNO. So it offers sort of like this sense of confusion to whoever is buying it, that it's actually maybe tied to some utility. And historically, I feel like it's a dangerous space for anybody to mingle in, where you have a celebrity promoting something that maybe has a utility, but maybe doesn't. A lot of people might get upset if it moons and then it stops mooning. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, it should be interesting to see how that plays out. At first, I thought it was like just another one of these kind of celebrity coins or celebrities making a bunch of noise on crypto Twitter and not being crypto native. But it seems like there's something different about her. I haven't followed it that closely, but like she seems to be getting more traction than other kind of new celebrities to crypto have been. So yeah, interesting to watch. More on topic though, in terms of Helium Mobile. So today we're at around just above 93,000 subscribers. Seen really, really good growth over the past year. I remember when that number was like 5,000 adding about 150 to 200 subscribers per day. So that's like, say, 60K annualized. To contextualize that a bit, Verizon and AT&T combined did around 550K new subscribers in all of 2023. So Helium Mobile's run rating like 10%, a little over 10% of two of the largest MNOs in the US right now in terms of new subscribers in a year. Question for Amir is like, at what level do you think incumbents in terms of like MNOs and kind of traditional wireless industry, and also investors outside of kind of like our DePIN crypto bubble, start to really pay attention and say like, wow, look how many subscribers there are here. Look at the growth rate. We're at about 100K right now. So, when do you think that number becomes kind of like headline news?
It's difficult to say. I mean, I think a couple things. One is I think, if you're able to sort of penetrate into a sector, I think you're more likely to get attention, right? And so in simple terms, someone like AT&T probably doesn't really have any idea how to target crypto people or talk to them in any way. When I worked in the video game industry, this was always the thing, right? Like video games had locked down 16 to 24-year-olds. And if you wanted to talk to them, like you really had to go talk to them that way. Maybe different now. But, so I think focusing in on the crypto space for a while and really trying to get a stronghold there and lean into sort of how crypto native we are and how important crypto is to what we do. That's, something that we're going to spend significantly more time on. You could make the daily number go up and down easily by just spending more money on marketing, but we're trying to be more efficient than I think the typical model. So we've got a bunch of initiatives coming up that really kind of lean into that. And depending on when this podcast airs, they either will or won't have already happened. So I don't know if I can really talk about them, but there should be some good things coming there. But I don't know how much. If you ask me to pick a number, I don't know that I could pick a number. But I do think some combination of really dominating a segment, and then for those that look a little bit more deeply, sort of understanding the model or why the model itself is different. So to me, one of the most significant things that we can kind of affect is like, what does it cost us to service a user versus what does it cost a traditional provider? And I think for those that look a little bit more deeply and get focused on that, they hopefully, if Helium and Helium Mobile are successful, they will find that to be extremely compelling.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So it sounds like the strategy is really to try to saturate the kind of crypto native, crypto friendly market in terms of like, you probably want everyone that owns crypto in the US to be a Helium Mobile subscriber, as close to it, and then have people outside of crypto be like, oh wow, like this is the crypto carrier. They've like dominated that segment. Now like they're looking to expand. Maybe stealing Sal's thunder a little bit from a question later, but I think it fits in well here. You guys have teased the Secure AF product maybe a couple of times over the past 6 months. From what I understand, it's like a kind of an anti-SIM swap protection type product. Obviously, like probably more relevant for crypto native people because of hacks and crypto being so kind of digital and on your phone, on your computer. So if you could share anything about the Secure AF product, like what it is, when it's launching, anything on that would be cool to hear about.
It's coming soon. I don't think that we can specify dates, but it's pretty close, within a quarter, I would say. We're going to have it. The idea behind it is much like you, Connor, described. It's focused on preventing SIM swaps and making sure that there's sort of bulletproof security against SIM swaps, which has been a recurring problem in the space. And what we're doing there is we are employing the very same principles that have been practiced broadly in the crypto space to preclude people from, stealing funds from one's wallet, to ensure that it's equally as hard to swap a SIM. Effectively, the way it would work is that, any kind of a operation that is related to like changing a SIM, such as, for example, if you want to like change a number, the most common way that SIM swaps occur is somebody comes in and says, hey, I lost my phone number or somebody stole it. Can I get a new SIM? And that is actually a malicious actor calling into the support, and they're able to social engineer their way into doing it. Any kind of operation like this would require effectively a cryptographic signature from the user. And moreover, we're also implementing a proactive backend monitoring. So for instance, let's say there's a malicious actor that is inside a carrier. So let's say like an upset employee at T-Mo, which is another very common way of, SIM swaps happening. It says, screw you guys, I'm just going to go and, steal all this data. So we're actually monitoring on the back end all of the records of like associations between the phone number and the SIM and checking whether or not there's recently been a confirmation from the end user using their cryptographic signature to authorize that. And if not, then immediately the user basically gets notified and the account gets flagged as, having been SIM swapped from the inside. So that's kind of the gist of how it will work. And, it's kind of maybe an unnatural way for, I would say, like an everyday person to secure their SIM. But for a crypto native person, somebody who's had a wallet and, signed crypto transactions, it's a pretty straightforward way. And at the same time, it's also quite bulletproof compared to, some of the other things that exist in the space.
Yeah, for sure. I saw this news article the other day about like, the scammers are now like targeting, basically sending text messages to T-Mobile employees and saying like, hey, for $50, like put a bounty on hacking some specific person's phone number, just insane. I wanted to ask you guys on the architecture of it, or like who it's designed for. So we use, I use and I know a lot of like crypto fund managers use this MVNO called Ifani, which is sort of like the service business based protection. They have people like inside the telco data centers and basically personally have to like, 7 or 8 different steps of approvals manually with them over the phone and in person with your ID, and have created sort of like a very manual but secure pipeline around changing your phone number. Is your guys' view that at the end of the day, like Helium Mobile as a service provider should be able to have the last say over changing a SIM or not, because like you guys owe that to your customers to be able to have to secure their phone number? Or is your view, no, like it's going to be up to an NPC, there's some multi-sig, and the user loses their keys, like, sorry, you're shit out of luck, you got to get a new phone number?
Well, the ultimate authority on changing the SIM is the owner of the SIM, which is the person. It shouldn't be us, and it shouldn't be, T-Mobile, in our case, that is our macro partner, and all the vectors of attack that can come from within inside Helium Mobile, from within inside T-Mobile, or from a malicious actor calling into us, our support, or T-Mobile support to social engineer a SIM swap, which are predominantly the common vectors of the attack, should be precluded through however you're architecting your security measures. And all of them are encompassed by how with device security have to function.
100% makes sense.
Gotcha. Yeah, that sounds super exciting. Thanks for the updates on that. Yeah, back to kind of Helium Mobile and the launch. You guys chose Miami as your pilot city, so I live here. Thought the launch went great. I've been a Helium Mobile kind of customer solely for a while now, so don't have any kind of backup SIM. Like just use Helium Mobile as my primary line, and kind of the whole process was great, from the porting over my number from AT&T to everything else. How would you guys say the launch went in Miami? I've seen a bunch of events for like New York, LA, Austin, kind of like a nationwide event and marketing push this summer and into the fall. So curious, like how you think the Miami launch went and what kind of lessons or learnings you're taking from launching in Miami to launching in each of these new kind of tier 1 cities that you go to over the summer and into the fall.
Yeah, from my point of view, I certainly learned a lot from Miami. I think there's one of the learnings, I think, is that it's really challenging. A city by city approach is a very Web 2 way of doing things, right? Like it's exactly the way that I don't know if Web 2 is the right way of describing, but it's the way an Uber would approach it and did approach it. Airbnb, I think, did the same, and it's very logical and makes total sense. What I think is harder, or I should maybe say unique, about the Web3 or crypto space is that a lot of it is really around network effects and momentum, and it's much harder to do that geographically, right? Like I think people are excited as a community, and that community exists, nationwide or globally. And the more you restrict it down, the less of that kind of excitement and network effect really kind of happens. At least that's how it felt. And so I think it went well. I mean, it's still, I think, our biggest single city. I don't know if that's right, Boris, in terms of like subscribers. So I think that's still true. The coverage appears to still be growing and looking good. I don't remember the percentages of data offload. I know it's a statistic we shared at one point, but then I think we decided it was too difficult to share accurately. And internally we have all these different filters that we try and use to try and understand like which of it is real data versus which is someone just streaming Netflix on their own phone for some reason. And those are all just various filters. I don't know that we know what the correct filter is, and so I don't know what the correct percentage is either. But it's certainly working at a pretty decent level, at least from my view. That and by working I mean the concept of kind of pairing a macro partner like T-Mobile, as Boris mentioned, with coverage that is being created by the Helium community. In my mind, worked a lot better than I expected it to at first. The sort of marriage of supply and demand is not the way we approach the IoT network at all. And so, again, that's very new, at least to us. And I think we are learning a lot by watching it sort of unfold and trying to understand what the right metrics are to look at on a regular basis.
100%. Yeah, I think that's a great segue to what I was going to ask next, which is basically just like around data offload, like T-Mobile, like data going over T-Mobile hotspots versus Helium mobile hotspots. Like you kind of said, like it's a noisy number, right? It's hard to get to. So instead of asking just like, what you think the percentage is, I'm more curious, like what levers does Helium mobile pull to increase the percentage of data that's flowing over Helium mobile hotspots versus T-Mobile? Because the unit economics work in a way that, the more data offload you can get on Helium mobile hotspots versus having to pay T-Mobile, kind of the cheaper it is for you all as a service provider, and then also the cheaper it is for kind of Helium subscribers. So is it just kind of all boosted hexes and that's it? Or is there more to the strategy in terms of getting deployments where you need them, where there's a lot of data being used?
Well, so I think over the course of the last 8 months, we've evolved quite a bit how the rewards are distributed to the hotspot operators. And by we, I mean, community and the mobile working group through a series of hits. Boosted hexes is probably a somewhat simplistic way to summarize it. But in a nutshell, yes, the whole premise is that vast majority, like 90+% of the data usage that all cellular subscribers have usually is in a very small set of concentrated areas. It's like maybe 10% of geographic areas. And unlike with the IoT network, where the goal was to build a ubiquitous coverage, here it has to be almost like a surgical coverage that will result in a lot of the offload. So the two big things that happened on the network that sort of attempt to drive this type of coverage is just the boosted hexes, and this is one of the utilities behind mobile token, is that service providers on the network can burn the token into specific locations, which they can determine based on where their subscriber base is using the data the most. And then those locations become the places where hotspot operators are rewarded more than other locations. But in addition, there has also been a number of Helium improvement proposals that have now been implemented that sort of implement this in an automatic, like algorithmic fashion, where we've just looked at the world and we've looked at certain areas, like, for instance, middle of the desert. We know for sure that there's not going to be a lot of data there, or like, middle of the ocean, or, middle of some lake. And there is this notion of, it's called Oracle hex boosting, but basically we take the external Oracle data about the world, such as what is the footfall in a certain region? Is this region, urban or rural? Is this a mountain or is this a desert? And depending on what the region is and how likely, in generic terms, the cellular data to be used there, hotspot operators will get rewarded more or less for covering that region. So that's basically the summary. Hope that answers it.
Yeah, it does. I think it's really smart. I expect we'll see more protocols try to like layer in some real world oracle or a couple of different real world oracles to diversify away the dependencies on any single one, but get smarter around how they issue rewards. The one thing I wanted to ask you next, Boris, both of you guys actually, we've known each other for a handful of years now. If you remember back a couple of years ago, we had a strong perspective on, I think the space as a whole did broadly on CBRS and sort of like neutral host. And we had all these debates around like what the right mobile core was, whether Magma would scale. And it turns out like a lot of that, or at least me reflecting on a lot of our discussions over those past couple of years, it was a lot of focus spent on probably the wrong question. The right answer would have been go to Wi-Fi, where the ecosystem is like extremely built out is a lot more mature from a telco offload perspective, and then go and really show the powers of the network and hex boosting and everything else from that function. Just curious, like what's your guys' perspective on the pivot? Do you feel like at some point the pendulum will swing back and CBRS will be the majority of, be the most important part of the Helium, sort of like 5G Helium mobile network? And just, general takes on this evolution that we've seen in the space from CBRS to Wi-Fi offload and whether it'll go back.
I'll take a shot at it first, then Boris can answer with the correct shot. I mean, part of what I think is interesting about startups and opportunities for me is like this sort of intersection of like something that couldn't be done before and something that has just happened that enables you to do something now. And CBRS for me was kind of one of those, right? Where the spectrum became available. You had open source cores like Magma. You had buy cells and companies like it selling kind of lower cost hardware. You had eSIMs, which made like, distribution of subscriber access easier. So there's all these like confluence of things that felt like was happening at the correct time. And then, of course, phones that support CBRS. And, we obviously weren't alone, and Boris will be able to speak better to this than I did because he was, really the one living through it at the time. But we weren't alone, I think, in thinking that was an interesting confluence of events and maybe an opportunity to take advantage of. I think the reality is, engineers tend to focus on completely the wrong thing is my feeling. And like the core is one of those places, right? Where I think everyone thought that, or not everyone, but there was a group of people, I think, that thought that the choice of core was really a very important thing. But it really turns out not to be the problem, at least fundamentally. And I think the problem fundamentally is on the user experience end and the subscriber end of the equation. And that today still remains in a state where unless you are the provider, of the macro network, and you can just kind of add CBRS cells to your existing macro network, and your core and your network in general don't care what frequency spectrum that they're already using multiple multiple frequency bands. Adding CBRS is kind of a nothingness for them. Unless you're there, the user experience is not great, right? Because you have to sort of depend on the handset to do something. And we've tried a couple of attempts at that where we had kind of mashed in the CBRS data and T-Mobile's data into a single SIM. That I don't think that works well at all. It kind of works, but you end up in these places where you have nothing. You have no data service at all for like minutes of time. Or you try and use some of the newer stuff that the phones are doing now, which, so we recently launched a CBRS SIM or eSIM beta that uses Apple's geofencing. And that's their step towards, a solution to how two SIMs and two networks should interoperate on one phone. At least from my perspective, ultimately, until cellular private networking support feels like using Wi-Fi networks, it's going to be very hard for the consumer experience to really work well. I mean, we had people, I don't know if you remember this, bars like freaking out at the fact that there were two signal strength bars at the top of the phone. It's like that nuance to where I think people are not used to an experience, and when it isn't perfect, and largely Wi-Fi is perfect at this point, right? Like you wander in and out of networks, and the phones are very smart about when you should and shouldn't be on the network. And until it feels like that, where people just call access to the internet Wi-Fi, which is kind of what happens today. I don't think it can work, right? Like it's too complicated. It's too messy. Like I don't want to have to install two SIMs. I don't want the bar to appear and disappear sometimes when I'm in range and out of range. I want to see SOS in the corner like ever because that just looks bad. So it's all of that kind of stuff that the average person is never going to tolerate. And that's nothing, and that's not something that we have enough control over. And at least for me, I was disappointed at how slowly that part of the CBRS story evolved at the carrier level, at the handset level.
So first of all, I wanted to say that I still, to this date, I'm very proud of all the work that the team has done to absolutely revolutionize the deployment experience of a cellular network. Like, I think that if you just look at the CBRS Magma stack that we at Nova have built and have made available to anybody to like deploy a cellular network, the simplicity and the like price performance of just like being able to do that, it's unmatched compared to anybody else that's offering like private cellular in the market unrelated to crypto. And that's still there, and there is no plan to, abandon it. It's definitely a lot more exciting. In a way, the mistake that we made is we focused on, I guess we got overexcited at solving the more exciting problem. The more exciting problem is like, okay, that's in our control. If we take the open source Magma, if we build our customized firmware for the cell, if we make it very easy to deploy, it will for sure work because the range is better and we'll get better coverage and it's going to be great. Now, that we did, and that works great. But the problem is that like in telco, everything moves extremely slow. And this is to touch on your other question of like, is it ever going to come back or not? Like, Wi-Fi is probably, 15 to 20 years ahead of CBRS. The industry is covered with the skeletons of the companies that have tried to do Wi-Fi offload over and over and over again. And it is only now that in the, big telco, the rails have finally built and the standards like open roaming have been established for consistently and predictably using Wi-Fi for offloading cellular data. So I think that CBRS is going to get there, but it's not about the deployment experience that we've optimized already, and it's not so much about the cost. It's about the telco industry at large. And by that, I mean not necessarily just the telcos themselves, but also the phone OEMs, the telecom operators doing stuff. It's about the phone OEMs that said, okay, well, this is an important supplemental technology to LTE, 5G, etc. So the phone has to have a lot of intelligence about when to use it, when not to use it, how to hand off the stuff. And they've built it in. And we're starting to see the same stuff happening with CBRS, but it's like 10 years behind, right? So when it happens, I think CBRS will see sort of, its second life. But until then, we are, continuing to maintain it. We want the network to still be there. We still have the largest CBRS network in the US, probably by far today. But, we need to continue building out coverage using the rails that are present in the, existing ecosystem. And that very much is Wi-Fi today and not so much CBRS. Yeah,
no, it makes a lot of sense. You want to use what works today while also continuing to, like you said, maintain and test CBRS. Like even recently I saw you guys turned on like CBRS data offload kind of beta testing again. So it's clearly still, being worked on. But if Wi-Fi works better for now, like why not use that? So yeah, that makes sense. Other thing I wanted to cover was that it's a few months ago now, but the FCC issued some huge fines, I think almost $200 million in fines to the three largest MNOs, so AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, for illegally sharing access to customer location information without consent. So curious how you guys approach that, if it's different, given that, that was something that was going on that I'm sure not many telco consumers were happy with, but was going on in the background, and those MNOs got fined for it. So yeah, curious the Helium Mobile approach there.
I think fundamentally it is, at least in my mind, like a business model problem, right? Like the carriers and everyone in the traditional telco industry, I think, are in a spot now where, the cost of network building is so high. And so much debt has been assumed, to build these networks, that they're very hungry. I mean, all businesses are hungry to make money, but I think that it's pronounced even more extremely in the telco space, where the capex costs are so high that I think it sort of incentivizes the wrong kind of behavior, right? And I think for us, like, not only do we have philosophically a very different point of view around like about people's data and whether we should have access to it and what we would do with it, and quite frankly, whether people should be paid for it. So philosophically, we have a completely different view, but also from a business model and an infrastructure point of view, we have a completely different view, right? Like we are not in the business of spending hundreds of billions of dollars of money that we borrow to go build out big networks. And I think we will see over the next decades that model be even more unsustainable as network access just becomes even more commoditized over time. And so firstly, we would never do it just because I think it's a shitty thing to do. And secondly, I think our business model puts us in a place where we would never have to even think about doing it, even if we thought it might be interesting for some reason. I do think location data is extraordinarily valuable data, and the way that we are dealing with it with Helium Mobile and the way the Helium network itself deals with it, I think it is the right way to do it, where it is shared in this sort of anonymized way. And the purpose of it is to, inform the community how to deploy, where coverage is, where data is being consumed, where coverage is needed. And that's very unique to our model and uniquely enabled by crypto, right? And I think I fully expect people to look at that and emulate it over time, just because it, to me, is an absolutely fascinating way of sort of doing kind of decentralized network planning to some extent, and also rewarding people for the data that they're sharing. Like, it should not be okay to not know how your data is used and not really consent to that. Like, I'm okay with Google reading my emails, in exchange for using Gmail for free. That's it's an explicit trade that I'm making, right? If that starts to change, then I think I should understand what those changes are and be able to make decisions around it. And I get definitely annoyed and upset when I see like the AT&T type, that, or where I see that kind of behavior going on and the fines going out for it, I think is not ideal.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. And I really like how you guys have approached the kind of customer location information, opt-in, get paid in tokens, that type of thing. One of the most, I guess, popular kind of critiques I've heard this cycle of Helium, there's always new FUD coming out or new critiques, but the critiques have evolved this cycle to be kind of, I think, mostly against like the sub-DAO model and having multiple tokens. And, is it confusing to investors? Is it siphoning value off from the HNT token? Is it kind of splitting the incentives of different stakeholders within the ecosystem to advocate for their token over another? So, I think there's some truth to these claims, but also that they're kind of factually incorrect, because the incentivization of kind of mobile network deployment was very, very crucial, probably existential to kind of like the Helium project as a whole, right? Like, you needed to get this flywheel going again to get mobile coverage out there, to launch an MVNO. So I think it was a necessary choice, but obviously it comes with some drawbacks, some complications. So just curious, like, do you think the sub-DAO model was necessary kind of in hindsight? What would you guys like respond to that kind of critique about, sub-DAO model, multiple tokens, et cetera?
I mean, I guess I can get into this one, seeing as HIP 51 was very, very much in my universe. It's a tricky one. I mean, I think whichever way you sliced it, someone was going to be upset about it, right? If it was, if it was just HNT, then, would there be enough incentive, or would mobile holders or mobile network deployers feel like it was unfair? Or, I don't know that there was a way you could introduce another network that would not be controversial in some way. Sorry. So overall, though, I think it's worked quite well. I think the Helium network is missing the right like economic model around what you do with those tokens. Like, I think it's great to be able to use them for governance, but I think there's more that can be done that doesn't eat into the utility of HNT. And some of those ideas were sort of like discussed around the time that HIP 51 was being proposed, and there was all kinds of interesting stuff, but it kind of is kind of gotten forgotten. The community, I think, is just very focused, on a specific set of problems. And has kind of forgotten to some extent some of the original ideas that were back there that I think would would be interesting uses of those tokens beyond governance. Not enough people vote still in any of the HIP proposals, and I wish there was more of that. And maybe that's a thing that the Helium network and as a whole really needs to spend a lot more time on, is like make it more lucrative or more interesting to vote. Because otherwise people aren't going to do it, and then they're going to complain about how the network gets directed. But it also perhaps would encourage more discussion and more proposals that are that I think are better uses for the tokens long term. That's my feeling on it.
So first of all, I think it's important to note that a lot of the stuff related to HIP 51 and sub-DAOs and stuff like that was not something that Nova introduced to begin with. It was really a kind of a community-driven initiative. There was a lot of back and forth between a lot of parties about how it should be structured. And I personally am not very happy with how it turned out in the end. I do think that it did introduce a lot of confusion. I do think that the premise that the community at the time, that was, the members of the community that were pioneering this concept, it was a flawed premise. The premise was that you need to have, it's very hard to get liquidity, and HNT has liquidity. So let's use HNT liquidity to create like this mega network of networks that can have sub-tokens. First of all, I don't think that anybody cares about the liquidity that the HNT provides for the programmatic treasury. And you can just look at how the tokens are priced. They are completely disconnected from their programmatic treasury valuation. But more important, I think that it's kind of like it's a byproduct of the community design process. And a lot of people that have designed it by definition were members of the community that were very in and deep with it. And for a regular person that is trying to understand how the rewards work and what is HNT and what is mobile, no regular person is ever going to spend so much time to understand the stuff about programmatic treasury and like how HNT provides liquidity and how you have all the sub tokens. You have to spend literally hours and hours of time reading different literature and stuff like that. And it's not as obvious from the standpoint of the community members that were designing this at the time, but looking like as an outsider, like we ended up with a model that is quite a bit more complicated than that it needs to be. So I think that I personally generally do like agree with the sentiment that it's complicated. But again, like all I can do is, have like a opinion that I state to just the community and maybe voice it over and over again as a member of the mobile working group. But, that means that if there's any changes that need to be introduced, they'll still need to be introduced by, the community process, HIPs, discussions and stuff like that. And it's unclear that there is like a very obvious path of how to like rectify it now.
I have a quick question.
The discussion is now over.
I wanted to ask you guys what the if you could rule the DAO for a day, you didn't need to have, if you could make whatever changes you wanted to the Helium DAO for a day, and without having the community approval, and then sort of like set things in the right direction, what changes would you make?
I would probably, if I had like a magic wand, I would get rid of the IoT token and I would leave HNT and IoT as like one thing. And then I would make and keep it focused on the, IoT stuff. And then I would have a completely different token for cellular network that has its own burn economics that probably mimic a lot of the stuff that the, IoT HNT do, but I would do away with programmatic treasury and the 3 token system and the HNT as a backing for like sub-DAO tokens. Just have like clean structure. Here's the IoT token. It has its own, simple burn economics and utility. Here's the cellular token, whatever it's called. It has its own. And I think that would solve a lot of the confusion around programmatic treasury.
I have a very different solution to the same thought. And I don't want to share it because it's in the process of being written up into a big thing that I actually do want to propose. But it's a similar idea. I do think there's confusion. There's more confusion than there should be, with the multiple token structure. I think Helium at some level has always been kind of confusing. I'm not sure that everyone or that anyone ever fully understood how proof of coverage worked in the IoT network, for example. But it was always okay because at a high level, the concept was simple to understand, right? Like you create coverage, you get rewarded for that coverage. The like level beneath it, I think people could feel free to ignore. With the multiple token structure, I think it's a lot more confusing than that. And so I agree with Boris that there would be a better way to solve that problem. I just think I would do it in a very, very different way, and I have thoughts on what that is, and maybe we'll see them in public soon, because I do think it's a very, very good idea. But yeah, I think simplifying back to like what Helium is all about in very simple terms is super important.
Super cool. Well, yeah, look forward to reading those hopefully when they're out. That wraps up our kind of regularly scheduled programming. Just have a quick lightning round here at the end for both you guys. It's a little more fun, lighthearted. Answers can be as shorter as long as you want, but typically trend to be shorter. First question is for both of you, just the craziest or coolest like Helium community member story that you've seen over the years. Amir, I know you went the project longer, so maybe start with you, but there's a lot of people in the community. There's a lot of crazy stories. Sal and I were reminiscing before you guys got on. So yeah, just anything you want to highlight from your time with the project.
I mean, honestly, it's got to be a bad one for me. It was some of the early like gaming that went on. I remember seeing like some pictures of like hundreds of hotspots like in a room, like a darkly lit room with just little green lights everywhere.
Yep.
So for me, that kind of thing is crazy. You can't tell whether to be like kind of flattered that someone would go to that level of effort or just disgusted by it. But yeah, seeing some of that kind of stuff, I think was always crazy to me.
Yeah, I can expand on that real quick because I was around in the early days. I think that was Sean Garvin. There was a couple other people, but Sean Garvin was one of them. And he was a huge personality too. Like he was in the Discord posting those kind of pictures, like kind of blatantly showing he was gaming, but he was also posting things like signing a lease for his new house and just like ridiculous stuff. So yeah, it was really crazy back in the early days of Helium. I'm glad we got all the gaming stuff worked out. But Boris, what about you? Craziest or coolest Helium community member story from your time at Helium?
Craziest or coolest community member story? Well, I think the thing that the very first time that we actually got exposed to the Helium community is probably the craziest thing that ended up like resonating with me probably for the rest of my life. And that is, we were FreedomFi at the time, focused on enterprise customers selling, FreedomFi gateway that is, private cellular network that's cheap and efficient to build. And, after we did the first POC, we decided that, we will announce that we're actually going to make that available for the Helium community. And that was really like my first really like meaningful step towards into crypto. And I remember that the day that we announced it, like I'm waking up and Leon, who is responsible for our website, is like texting me. I already have like, 20 texts on my phone. And he's like, dude, we've already sold, like some crazy number of these gateways. We're normally selling 10 gateways a day or something like that. And he's like, we just got, like 6,000 orders. And then like, I wake up and I start like, and I'm getting texts from Amir and Abai, and they're like, oh, haha, welcome to the hug of death from the, crypto community. and then like our website goes down. So we were we were, because we didn't expect that. So it got effectively DDoSed by people, and they started buying just like everything on our website. We had the gateway that was specifically the Helium gateway, and then we had our regular products. And I'm just looking at this string of emails, like you got the order, and I'm seeing like a bunch of orders are just for the regular gateways also that have no crypto functionality whatsoever. So people are just like, take my money, So, and it's like everything's falling apart, like wrong gateway is getting ordered, website is down, everybody's like texting me right and left. So that was probably like, one of the most scary and at the same time exhilarating experiences that also happened to be my first like meaningful, foray into crypto.
No, I love that. That's awesome. Things were pretty frantic back in the day for sure. Yeah, I really appreciate you guys jumping on. This was awesome. Great update, I think, for everyone that listens to our podcast. Obviously, Helium is one of the biggest, oldest DePINs. So it's been a pleasure getting to see the project grow this entire time. And I'm glad DePIN is really hot in the sector this cycle as well. But yeah, thanks again, guys.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Proof of Coverage podcast. We'll be posting one new episode a week on Mondays, interviewing the best DePIN and crypto founders out there. If you like this episode, please follow us on Twitter or X at CoverageProved or on any major podcasting platform. Thank you.